all know Species, right? The 1995 sexy alien sci-fi horror movie featuring an H.R. Giger-designed sexual predator, and more importantly, Natasha Henstridge getting naked. It's the sort of film that appealed to a lot of boys of a certain age for obvious reasons, but is it a film that's really stood the test of time, or is it nothing but a product of its era? So Species opens up in a laboratory, where we're introduced to a young girl called Syl, who's being experimented on in this kind of Cronenberg fly-inspired high-tech prison. She's clearly deeply unhappy, and she's being watched over by Ben Kingsley, who we can tell is obviously up to no good because, well, I mean, just look at him. Anyway, she breaks free from the lab and goes on the run, and Ben Kingsley then recruits a team of people who've all got their own unique set of skills. We've got Michael Madsen as a brooding bounty hunter, Alfred Molina as a scientist, Forrest Whitaker as an empath in a little hat, and Marg Helgenberger as the woman. They're then told that the girl that escaped was actually a test subject, the product of mixing human and alien genes to create this hybrid creature, although as we learn later on, she's basically a lot more alien than she is human. Ben Kingsley then tells his team that they need to find her before she goes out and starts trying to mate with the population of Earth, or else there's going to be a whole new breed of potentially dangerous aliens running amok in the city. And Syl, who of course has now grown into the super sexy Natasha Henstridge, really badly wants to get down to it and start having babies, but as she's got pretty strict standards about who she's going to hitch up with, men start turning up dead pretty quickly. Now that's basically the shape that Species takes, and it's definitely got itself a decent amount of momentum. Things come together in a pacey comic book style, and there's a fair amount of gore and bloodshed as well as, of course, a great deal of sex and nudity. We also had creature designs provided by H.R. Giger, the guy responsible for designing the xenomorph in Alien. In fact, if you look at the original poster, that pretty much sums up the appeal of Species. Slick 90s alien-inspired creature designs and a naked Natasha Henstridge. And that's really what you're here for. I think it's also got a brilliant, quintessentially 90s soundtrack from Mr. Christopher Young, who is the guy responsible for the best orchestral horror scores of the 80s, Hellraiser and Hellraiser 2. It's got a fun cast of people that you probably wouldn't have thought of as superstars in 1995, but they're all instantly recognisable, and they're all good, solid choices for their parts, and who would all go on to bigger and better things. It's a film that I think is probably best pitched at a slightly younger male audience, again for obvious reasons, but also because it's got a script that's big and silly, and full of people coming out with ominously gnomic dialogue, and lines that seem designed just to be slapped into a trailer to sound cool, but realistically are the sort of things that nobody would ever really come out with.
Los Angeles is where the battle's going to be fought. And won.
Basically, it's a script that seems like it was written by a 15-year-old boy that read a lot of Dark Horse comics, where everything's cool and clipped and feels slightly unnatural, but it works well as you bounce about from one gory or sexy sequence to the next. It's a film that keeps things on a very surface level, like a slightly edgy independent comic from the 90s, but with that sizzling sexuality that you got with those later 80s into the 90s erotic thrillers. Because if you want one of those crappy X meets Y soundbites for Species, it's pretty much Alien meets Basic Instinct, with gooey creature effects and sci-fi stuff, that's mixed with that dark, sensuous sex and death charge that you get from a film about the inherent threat of a highly sexualized female character like you had in Basic Instinct. But imagine in Basic Instinct if, instead of being this Black Widow killer, Catherine had turned into an alien, and that's sort of what they were going for with Species. So, why is it that Species doesn't really work? Now, I've seen Species a few times over the years, and every time I come back to it, I go into it remembering that I didn't like it, but never remember exactly why. There's a few things that always stick with me, like the fact that the CGI at the end is less than convincing, or that Ben Kingsley reads his lines like somebody's fed a load of dialogue into a robot that's unable to process punctuation or nuance.
The second message turned out to be a new sequence of DNA with a rather friendly instructions on how to combine it with ours. Here's some technical data on the whole operation. You can get feedback on it from Dr. Baker here.
But there's a lot more to Species than just a few things that are kind of their time. I think that the biggest problem that I've got with Species is that it doesn't know exactly what it's trying to do, and that really all comes down to the character of Sil herself. Think about it. The first time that we see Sil is in this scene, where she's played by Michelle Williams as a younger girl. She's trapped in this high-tech lab, she's being experimented on, and we feel for her character, whilst Ben Kingsley looks on at her like a mad Bond villain. So when she eventually breaks free, we're rooting for her to escape. We follow her as she's exposed to the world outside, and we get a few kind of fish out of water scenes that are cute and interesting, and we're with Sil as she learns to adapt to our world. Now, as played by Michelle Williams, she's very wide-eyed and vulnerable, and it's obvious that we're meant to like Sil. But then she goes into a cocoon in order to progress to the next stage of her life, which is the DTF adult version as portrayed by Natasha Henstridge. And it might seem kind of perverse considering that this is a film that's always been sold as basically a sci-fi flavoured erotic thriller, but I think that Species begins to lose me when Natasha Henstridge takes over as Sil. Because I don't think she's got nearly the same ethereal alien-like qualities that Michelle Williams showed in her brief time on screen. Now, as Natasha Henstridge, Sil is a character who basically goes from being childlike and in awe of the world and believably alien, to instantly showing almost no emotions. This adult Sil, who we'll stick with for most of the rest of the film, really just wants to get in the family way as quickly as possible, but she also seems to have totally figured out our world. She's no longer a fish out of water alien creature, but ends up playing the part basically like a horny foreign exchange student who doesn't quite speak English very well, or know that it's a bit continental to take your top off in a nightclub and dance about in your bra. It's a less interesting character, and for me, adult Sil holds my sympathies much less than the younger version of the character did, because she isn't called upon to do much else than to wander around in a horny trance for most of the entire film. But here's the big thing. She might be less sympathetic, fine, but Species pretty much sets up Sil as the villain who our team of heroes working for their sinister corporate overlord have to stop. But what is she doing that's really that bad? I mean, she wants a baby, and yeah, okay, she very occasionally ends up in a situation where she has to kill somebody, but she isn't a threat in herself. The real drama in Species comes from we need to stop Sil from having babies, but Sil, despite her body count, isn't a dangerous predator or a ruthless killer like Sharon Stone in Basic Instinct. That's where I think Species fucks up, by never suggesting that there's any other course of action than hunt down and kill Sil. Think back to that first scene. Sil has been kept in a lab and cruelly experimented on. We even have Forrest Whitaker's character, who's an empath, explain to us that Sil is troubled and afraid. She isn't on this deadly rampage killing dudes and forcing them to get her pregnant, she's just following her genetic programming, and going about it in pretty much the same way anyone else would in 1995, going out and meeting up with men in the hopes of finding the right father for her child. It's not like Julia from Hellraiser, where she's on the prowl just to get a hold of men to use them for her own ends and then to kill them off. Sil even takes the time to romance her fellas, women not so much. But she is respectful of the whole dating process, so it's hard to really think of her as a deadly creature. She just wants babies. Is that really so bad in itself? Well, yeah, it is because of what those babies represent, which is the start of an outbreak of super horny aliens that could take over the Earth, but if you're going to be telling a story about a dangerous alien wanting to breed, then why not make her more of an out-and-out threat? Why not make her more homicidal, more sexually aggressive, where she's driven to do more extreme things to get what she wants? Because the way that Species is set up, you think that there has to be some kind of repercussions for Ben Kingsley as the evil scientist experimenting on young Sil. Think of Alien, where the corporation was in the background as this evil entity that wanted the alien brought back to them and didn't care about the lives of the Nostromo's crew. You've got two layers there. There's an alien that's actively going around killing everything that gets in its way, plus you've got the underlying threat of the evil corporation that basically wants all the heroes dead. That's a perfectly tense setup where our characters are alone and isolated and under fire from all sides. In Species, it's basically, imagine the corporation from Alien, but they're the good guys and they're tracking down a basically sympathetic alien hybrid that they've been experimenting on. And the ending is, they catch it and kill it, and that's it. The good guys are doing what they're doing, not because it's the right thing to do, but because they've been hired by the corporation to do it, and even though our cast of characters are fairly likeable in themselves, they all come off as just these corporate puppets, who never question the rationale of what it is that they're doing, or whether or not Sil has got the right to survive, or not to be hunted down mercilessly. And for me, that's the difference between a film made in the 70s like Alien, where there's that natural suspicion about the ulterior motives of huge inhuman corporations, and your heroes are realistic down-to-earth human beings, and a film that's made in the 90s, where it's just do what the company tells you and pose about looking cool whilst you're doing it. There's never any point where the characters question the morality of what it is that they're doing, it's just boobs, gore, one-liners and stuff blowing up. Which is fine if you're a nerdy 15-year-old boy in the 90s where it all seems quite adult and shockingly taboo, but for my money, it's that emotional disconnect and that let's just kill the alien mentality that stops Species from being a cool film about a deadly female alien that wants to fucking kill its way through the men of Earth, and ends up making it feel like the adolescent alien porn that it always had the danger of becoming. I mean, why build Sil up as a sympathetic character if she's just going to end up as a generic monster that needs to get the shit blown out of it by our gun-toting heroes? Why show us the cold evil corporation experimenting on this young girl if nobody in the whole film ever tries to suggest that they're the ones in the wrong as much as, if not more so, than Sil? Why spend tons of time and effort on creature designs for alien Sil and then barely even show her in her final form? In fact, why even bother getting H.R. Geiger to design this huge, elaborate full body form for Sil at all, when people were really just going to see Species for Natasha Henstridge taking her top off? Because that's what it all really comes down to. I might have problems with the way that Sil is characterised and the fact that I think that morally, Species is all over the place. But those are arguments that don't really stand up when compared to Species' greatest assets. And to be honest, there's a very good reason that Species is still a film that people remember after all these years. In fact, there's two very good reasons. And I don't think that there's any shame in that, to be honest. Species is, and will always be for me, a high-end exploitation film. And like all exploitation films, there's a time and a place for them. It's fun, and daft, and sexy, and it's a film that knows all too well how to give the audience exactly what they want. Which is why it made a load of money when it came out, and why they squeezed out a few sequels later on, because it absolutely was popular. Which isn't at all the same thing as being good, it was just a very well marketed film that found a little niche for itself and managed to cash in on it for all it was worth, squeezing out 4 films, plus novels and comics, and fair play to it for that. But that's not all. There's another 3 Species films, and I've already reviewed all 3 of them, and if you want to hear what I've got to say about them all, then you'll be able to find them posted on my brand new Patreon page, patreon.com/morbidmoonlight. There's 5 tiers up there at the moment where you can support the channel by throwing me a few quid a month, which will help me to make more videos and to improve the overall quality. Any money you give to me will be going straight back into the channel, investing in better equipment and software to help make this channel as good as I want it to be. You can find my reviews of all 3 Species sequels on the second tier, where for £5 a month you'll get access to exclusive audio reviews that I'll be posting up as regularly as I can, probably I think mainly of newer stuff. You can also get me to review films you want to hear me talk about at the higher tiers, so if you do like what I do here and you want to have a say in what stuff I'll be covering in the future, then any kind of support would be greatly appreciated, and I promise that I will do my best to keep making things better and better. So if you're still listening, why not take a quick look over at patreon.com/morbidmoonlight just to see what's on offer, but absolutely no pressure. Thanks very much for your time and for listening to all this shite, and hopefully we shall see you all again soon in the next one.